Hello, welcome to the Jenkins Documentation Office Hours. Today is October 31st, 2024, and this is the EU-US edition. So around the table, we have myself, Kevin Martins, Bruno Verhofstadt, and joining us today is Antoine Neveu. Welcome to everyone. If anyone else joins, we'll be sure to welcome them as well. And so we'll just take a quick look at the agenda. So for today, I've got some notes on the contributor spotlight. Hacktoberfest is wrapping up at the end of today, so we'll just touch base on things in that realm. And Bruno was able to generate some stats for the Hacktoberfest participation over the month, which is great. We've got a couple new blog posts that have just recently come out and that we're planning on. Jenkins elections are going to be happening sooner than later, and the voter registration period does end today, so we'll talk about that. Yesterday was the LTS release, the new baseline of 2.479.1. So things went well there. Some recent work done on Jenkins.io, documentation-wise, and a couple other topics there, some items, some issues closed. Is there any other topics that anyone wants to make sure gets put on the agenda for today, or does that look like it covers everyone?
Nothing from my side. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
If you get like a few minutes to talk about the plugin developer documentation at some point, I joined because I had a question and I thought, actually, let's join the meeting. And if anyone wants to talk about it, if there's any time, though, like I wouldn't want to steal your time.
Yeah, no worries, Antoine. I think we could definitely talk about that. Here, let me just get this. I'm going to put it before the recent work done, just because some of this is a rehash from last time. So, yeah, we'll definitely touch base on that, though. Well, okay. So first off, so it is October 31st. Happy Halloween, everyone. Moving on. Contributor Spotlight. So we just published Devin Nussbaum's last week, and next week we'll be publishing Jesse Click's. So lots of great contributions, different perspective from the developers here, engineers that are working on Jenkins and CloudBees as so it's nice to have their perspectives and what their experiences have been. Jesse has been working on Jenkins since before it was Jenkins, so it's really interesting to see the progression from the starting point to now. So really looking forward to publishing Jesse's. And then I've been interviewing a couple other folks. We'll have enough to get through the end of the year, which is really nice and exciting. And then earlier today in the advocacy and outreach meeting, we discussed some other types of posts that might fit the bill for the contributor spotlight. So best advice given from the contributors. I was thinking something like a time lapse or a kind of retrospective on Jenkins, their first impressions versus now after being in it for a little while. And there's other topics I could potentially broach at that point as well, but it'll be a discussion that we continue to have, and we'll figure out as time goes on. The contributor spotlight's been really great to give perspective, to give the microphone to people that don't necessarily have that all the time. So it's been a great experience for them, for me. It's really nice that everyone's been willing to participate and collaborate that has so far. So just thanks to all of them, and we'll have more as we go on. Today is the last day for Hacktoberfest, so it is the end of October. Just thank you to all of the contributors for all their work that they've done, whether it was in Jenkins.io or Jenkins Infra, the various Jenkins Infra organizations and Jenkins CI organizations. So lots of great work done. Several contributors have helped with screenshot updates, which was something that needed to happen after the UI updates and the terminology was updated for stuff like managed Jenkins and the subcategories under that. So thanks to all of the contributors for all of their work on that. And Bruno was actually able to run a script on the Hacktoberfest stats. So through Jenkins CI and Jenkins Infra, we had just over 1,000 pull requests created in total, which is great. 193 by 50 different contributors for Hacktoberfest specifically. and the validated Hacktoberfest PRs were at 186 by 46 contributors. I know there are a couple of for Jenkins.io that I need to review and validate, but a little less participation than previous years, but more quality and better overall pull requests and work done, I think. It's been a pretty standard message across the board for a lot of projects that the participation might have been lowered, but seeing this is really nice. And I think even if it's not the highest numbers, they're doing a lot of good work and making the contributions that matter. Bruno, any other notes on Oktoberfest or anything to note, share?
No, you covered it all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then on that note too, so there's a list of issues that was worked on by Darren, Pope, Mark Waite, and Bruno, just to get the list of issues. That's still available. They can be worked on at any time. It doesn't have to be Hacktoberfest. It's always there. But that was something that they worked really hard on to make sure that it was a great introduction point for people to get started with Jenkins. And Darren and Mark have been doing various developer video topics over the last few weeks. They just published one a couple days ago on maintaining plugins. It was part 4 in their series, if I'm not mistaken. So they've got a lot of great content there. I've included a couple links here, the various developer topics and maintaining a plugin tutorial. You can see these are all on YouTube at this point. So feel free to check those out when you have some time. And these are things that expand a lot on a lot of the documentation we already have, like the modernizing Jenkins plugins, the plugin improved plugin tutorial, using open rewrite in plugin development. So lots of good stuff there, and definitely worth checking out if you have free time to spare. Next up, so we have a few different blog posts. The brownouts for Update Center are ongoing. The infra team has been utilizing these to make sure that migrating Update Center is non-impactful for users and that there is no drop in service. They've been reporting on their findings and been really transparent about everything. It's been incredibly helpful. They've found an issue that they need to address before the migration can take place, but the brownout's exactly what that's intended for, and so it's working like a charm. And then the other blog post that's come out is, we just discussed this last session, but Bruno was at the, was it the Linux Foundation mini summit or?
No, it was the open source summit run by the Linux Foundation, but then there were some satellite summits around this main conference, and this one was the CDF, so the Continuous Delivery Foundation mini summit. You got it right.
There you go. All right. And I'm just using your advice about providing the wrong answer, so someone has to jump in and give the right information now.
That's a latitude I like. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but Bruno did a talk about how the tutorials for Jenkins have been revamped using Docker Compose, why that's really beneficial, how that's better for the user experience overall, how it's better from a management standpoint, a security standpoint, just in every sense of the word, it's better of an experience for everyone. And just how that came about, how it was a result of Google Summer of Code, working with Ashutosh for getting that implemented, and just how, and the tutorials are part of the documentation, obviously, but just a great example of the work going to make the experience better overall and provide an easier starting point for getting involved in Jenkins. Once again, it's designed to get people's foot in the door. So fantastic. Thank you very much, Bruno.
Oh, thank you. I should hire you as my public relation, frankly.
I'm happily employed, but I'm happy to do work on the side. So, but yeah, no, happy to. I want to make sure that the work that you're doing on the project and that you're trying to, you're doing the work to improve what can be a pain point for someone getting started, not just with Jenkins, but with development in general. So, it's crucial that I think it's crucial that we highlight that and make sure it is as known as possible. So
thank you, Gavin.
And then the last blog post isn't out yet, but with the Alpha Omega grant and the work being done on content security policy by Yaroslav and Shlomo, we want to share the progress report that Bruno wrote up. So that'll be coming. in the next couple of days. And so it's going to share the work that they've completed thus far and what the outlook is for the couple months while the CSPs improved. So next up, Jenkins elections. So voter registration period ends today. So if you haven't already registered to vote, make sure you do that. We have the voter registration announcement blog post here. I've simplified it a little bit, and if you want to join, just get into the election voter group here. I don't have the join button, but if I wasn't already a member, it would allow me to join here. And that's the way you're eligible to vote in the upcoming elections. So right now we have 74 registered voters, which is great. And we're going to actually be having voting take place this year. The last couple of years, we didn't have voting because we only had one nominee for each position. This year, we have multiple nominees for the governance board positions and 2 different nominees for the release officer position. So we will have a full vote. And if you want to make sure you're part of that, just be sure to join the voter group. And then voting will take place starting tomorrow, November 1st, and will end on November 30th, with the results being announced shortly after that, either December 1st or 2nd, depending on when the votes get tallied. And we'll share all that information as soon as it's available. And then there is an election committee group that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. This is Basil Crow and Mark Wheat. They're running the election this year, so they'll be able to answer any questions you might have. And there was a candidate statements blog post separately that provided statements from all the candidates that were there that we have for the governance board positions and release officer position. Next up is yesterday we had our latest baseline release. So 2.479.1 was released yesterday. Everything went well. No major issues or hiccups or anything that would have prevented or caused any problems. So that was great. Mark Waite was the release lead. I created the changelog upgrade guide. All of those are now available completely in the on Jenkins.io. And this does include the requirement of Java 17 for Jenkins going forward, and updates to Spring Security and Spring Framework 6 and Jakarta EE9, which were huge backend processes that the Infra team, Basil Crow, Adrian, Le Charpentier, both worked extremely hard on diligently to get that taken care of and upgrade so that Jenkins is future-proof. So thanks to them for all the work on that. And the upgrade guide includes the instructions provided by Basil in a specific comment if you're using the environment injector plugin. We also have instructions if you need to upgrade, or if you're using the LDAP or CAS plugins, they need to be updated as well. So instructions for that accordingly. And then we also updated the servlet container policy page so that it reflects the latest LTS support. Antoine, I want to invite you here. So you wanted to discuss developer plugin documentation, or you had questions about the plugin documentation process?
Yeah, actually, that's more like a very general question. In Cloudbase, we've been welcoming a whole lot of newcomers recently who are now getting into developing Jenkins plugins and learning a lot about that. And well, we have a lot, there's a lot of material to learn, plenty of existing plugins. There's documentation online, and we've got guides and very experienced people who can help them. But it's always a bit, I don't know, I'm always a little bit bothered when I send them to the developer documentation on the Jenkins website, and I see all these small warning icons all along almost any pages saying that's work in progress, and that's there for quite some time. And I've been taking notes along the side of things I learned while developing Jenkins plugins and things and how things could be organized somehow. So I had this idea that's laying there and coming from quite some time about offering to revamp that whole thing and to reorganize everything. But I really do not want to mess with, I don't know, maybe some people already have ideas or some people are actively working on it. So I thought I'd come to the special interest group and discuss it just to get a feeling out of it. But yeah, basically that was my point. I feel like the developer documentation of Jenkins is slightly outdated and does not contain as much content as I'd like. And when I give it to newcomers, I always have that feeling that in comparison with everything else in the documentation, like the product documentation, I feel like it's a little bit poor. And I thought, okay, about like diving into it, spending some time and trying to get something better. But I wanted to know if there was, I don't know, an initiative, or if it was something that I should rather propose for Google Summer of Code, for example. Like, I really wanted to get opinions on that, and how is it better to go? Should I write down like my ideas and a plan that I'd like to follow and see if people are interested, or dive into it myself? Or should I wait for Google Summer of Code, or is there anyone else working on something that I could join and help? That's a basic thing I wanted to discuss about.
Great. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. So I don't want to speak for Bruno, but I know that we are already planning Google Summer of Code 2025. So that is a real possibility there. As far as I'm aware, there's no one working on that specifically right now. So you wouldn't be, it's not something that you'd be overwriting anything or working on something that someone else is already doing. And yeah, completely agree that there's a lot of missed opportunities or knowledge gaps in the documentation, especially like you said, the work in progress note does not inspire confidence in a reader. So it would be great if we could get rid of those, but that takes a level of expertise at the same time that the Google Summer of Code participant may or may not possess in that sense. They might not be in a position where they could write good, clear, and concise documentation about plugin development processes. They were more likely to be getting started on that process and like looking to the documentation for that sort of information themselves. So I don't know that that would be the best route, but I love the idea of putting this together as like a plan and trying to figure out how we can address this properly. Because that's something that I'd be more than happy to investigate further with you and work on and understand better. Because I personally don't have the plugin developer knowledge. I work on the documentation specifically. I'm not a developer, so I just don't have that in my wheelhouse. But if someone does, I don't want to prevent them from submitting that work or providing that information to the documentation to others and making the documentation more usable ultimately. If I keep talking, I'm going to talk in circles. Bruno, do you have any thoughts, insights, or?
No, I'm on the same line. Yeah, more or less. Because you're right. Finding the right contributor who already knows how to develop a plugin, how to maintain a plugin, and they're able to write the right documentation to help others. I don't think we have such a strange animal in the community, because if people already know what it's like to build a plugin, to maintain a plugin, to update a plugin, then I don't think they will be part of Google Summer of Code. They are already one of our regular contributors. So I don't see that project as a good fit for GSOC, unfortunately. There are other projects we'd like to work with during GSOC, but that's the same problem. We won't find the right person to do the job. That's a major hiccup for me. So as much as this is needed, I'm not so sure we should do it through the GSOC summer. But thanks for proposing, Antoine, and maybe we could do that, not the three of us, but the rest of the community and us, before GSOC.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, GSOC is in summer, right? And like we're just out of it. So
yeah,
in the idea I had why proposing GSOC first doesn't really matter, because the real plan is actually to revamp that developer documentation anyway. And the idea I had was like, I could start like writing laying out the plan that we could follow and stuff like that. I'd actually work that with other contributors as well. Like definitely not do it by myself, or like my actual plan, if I'm being honest, is like I'm gonna write like the whole plan of how I think the documentation should look. Then I'm gonna call out some developers, like experienced developers, where I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get like doomed, and they're gonna explain me all the things which I missed and everything that I do not understand properly, which is awesome. And then my idea with GSOC was like, probably there's enough content that we can fill like a whole bunch of that plan with everything. And there might be some places where we need someone to just deep dive in one concept. Say, I don't know, let's take an example, forms in Jenkins plugins. Like you got different components and you've got different methods. And it would be just one thing, like just write, like dive into it and write everything there is to know about forms, like how to write them, how to validate them, how to secure them, all that kind of stuff. And you just focus on that part. And I was thinking maybe if there are different parts like this, it could actually become several JSOC projects, actually, just to deep dive in something and document it the best way possible. So let's see, maybe we can do everything on our own, and maybe there are opportunities in there that we can use later.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Antoine, and I am fully supportive of if we have someone that can provide the insight into like what's missing, what's needed, and kind of help that part of guidance and that part of discovery, basically. We'll have a starting point to work from. We'll know what we need, and we'll have a better base and backing to say, hey, this is what needs to happen to make the documentation more usable or more confidence inspiring to a new plugin developer. Yeah, I really like that idea, and I think that's a good plan, and I would love to see it just kind of see if there's a specific example of the documentation that you have in mind, let's say, where the work in progress is there and it's not necessarily, maybe it's like not up to date, or it's lacking something that is more common practice now, for instance, or like the forms, you mentioned forms specifically. If there's something that is very obviously missing from forms, like what do we need to include in that documentation to make it better? And yeah, if that means someone does a deep dive and finds that out and figures that out and provides that information, perfect. We can do that. We can work with that. I'm happy to provide all the review and feedback and help in any way I can, for sure. Because I would love to make the developer documentation and the plugin development documentation, especially, more usable, basically.
What would be a good place to just like, I'm going to take a little bit, because right now I just have some messy notes here and there about things. So I'm going to take a little time to prepare that. Where would be a good place if I say had a plan and some details about how I'd propose that we start shaping the doc? Where would be the perfect place to share that with everyone else?
So I would say community.jenkins.io would be the best place to share it, because you can start a thread on there and post, and that can be updated accordingly over time, edited, whatever needs to happen. People can comment and like that, and that avoids it being something like Gitter where it's moving and it might get lost in the shuffle and like time. So community would probably be the best place. If you wanted to keep it internal for a little at first, any of the community Slack channels would probably be the best course of action for that. But if it's something you want to open up and just have it be completely public, and the community discourse is probably the best place for it.
Awesome. How do you go about that then? Perfect.
Cool. Anything else on that, Antoine, before? Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for bringing the topic and joining the discussion today. I really appreciate it. And then lastly, just some recent work done on Jenkins.io. So last session we talked about the automatic image compression in pull requests. So this was something that Alex Brandeis incorporated into Jenkins.io. It's come up on several pull requests for Hacktoberfest participants because they're doing screenshot updates that the image compression throws a flag saying it's an error. But it doesn't, looking into the configuration and the documentation of the action that's being used, it seems like it might have something to do with where the pull request is coming from specifically. The documentation said something about it's the forked repo versus the main repo, so that might just be something that comes up. I'm still encouraging people to compress their images before their submission. So we're still going to go about the normal process. This is just to make sure anything that doesn't get compressed is caught. So thanks to Alex for implementing this, and hopefully we can get a little bit more clarity on what's going on with the error message in there. Mark included a banner in the previous LTS release just to signify users of the end of life for Java 11. So that was added prior to yesterday's release. Also included a 2+2+2 Java support plan link, so something that we've been talking about over the last year. With the release yesterday, again, Java 17 is now required. So we were trying to make sure that everyone was aware of this as possible prior to the release. I've been working on the usage of Jenkins instance in the documentation. So I finally got through a lot of the pages, and now we got down to the last couple items in the security documentation. Those were finally reviewed. Thanks to Daniel Beck and the security team for completing that. So I'll be closing out that issue. And then Daniel Beck added a couple of different pieces of documentation recently. One was the restricted annotation, which was not present prior. So thanks to Daniel for adding that. And then the other one is Daniel added a link to the semgrep overview of XXE. So there's now a link in the documentation that goes right to their, I think it was a cheat sheet that he had called it. So thanks to him for that as well. And then the WebSocket configuration for Apache Reverse Proxy, we merged that. So thanks to Alan for his work on that. And then something that came up earlier this week, prior to the release, there was an issue where the changelog was displaying the 2.479.1 changelog before the release happened. So Mark created the issue, and thanks to Daniel Beck for updating and resolving that issue. The changelog is now working as expected again. And now that we're post-release, it's kind of a non-issue for now. So we'll have to keep an eye out for next one, but it was fixed prior to the release, so it should be all set. And on that note, too, the weekly changelog generator has been working as expected again. It did have an issue a couple weeks ago, but everything's been back on track since then. So it looks like everything's working as it should now. And yeah, things are good. So that comes to the end of the agenda for us today. It's at time, so we'll go ahead and wrap up in a second. Before we do, are there any other topics or anything else anyone wanted to share before we close? Okay, so then we'll stop the recording in just a moment. It'll be available in 24 to 48 hours, and it'll be posted on community. And we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks. Stay safe and take care until then.